Hey guys, how's it going? My name's David, I'm the director of Ichigo Ichie, and today we're going to be talking about some of the artistic and story aspects of our new title, Backbeat. I'm really excited to share with you the process that we've gone through to create this game, and I hope that you get to learn a little bit more about the world of Hornsburg and the characters we've created and what we're trying to achieve with this title. So let's get started about the art. So going back a step, in our first title, Hexagroove, we had a very minimalistic art style. And we were building something that we wanted to do to build an environment that felt like a club, but did it in a way that was stripped down and let you focus on the UI and the experience of the game. So we ended up with this kind of low poly homage to different kinds of clubs, and we used this gradient shader, which shaded everything in the 3D world based on the depth and how far back they were from the camera. We didn't have any textures, and it was very simplistic, and it was a good way for us to get started on our first title. Now with Backbeat, of course, we wanted to take things a step further and create a world which was more alive and had more character and helped convey the story of where this took place. So of course Backbeat has moved leagues beyond where Hexagroove was. We have characters, we have a full story, they're living inside of this world that takes place in the 1990s, and we are stretching ourselves as a studio here. Now one thing about the art style is that we wanted to talk a little bit about what we've done with the past and the future. Hexagroove is a game that takes place maybe in modern day in a club in an imaginary town or something like that. But with Backbeat, we wanted to look back to the past and build on the 90s, because that's where the game takes place. So before I go any further about this, tell you about the game, Backbeat is a multilinear time-based puzzle strategy game set in 1995, and it's built around live performances of jazz and funk music. Some inspirations that we had for the title were other stealth strategy games and also Sokoban style games. So we're thinking about like Invisible Ink and XCOM games where you have limited resources and you have to avoid guards or enemies to get to some kind of objective. And also those games like a Monsters Expedition or Lolo, where you can move through an environment and deform it in some way, and you have to get to a goal area by manipulating that in a puzzle type way. Also, the scoring of Backbeat is built on musical theory, so we're trying to introduce the principles of music and hide these inside of the game design. So in that sense, it extends from Hexagroove in terms of what we're trying to accomplish there. If you're more curious to learn about the game design of Backbeat and the way that we decided to approach that, I encourage you to check out some of the other talks that we're streaming this week where we can tell you about the unique gameplay mechanics and dynamic music that exists in Backbeat. So Backbeat is set in 1995, and it's for strategy and puzzle gamers like you, or maybe those of you who have had dreams about being in a band, or you're wondering about the 90s, or you're feeling nostalgic for the 90s. So we really are building on this kind of physical analog vibe that we're working into the game. The single-player campaign has between 12 and 25 hours of gameplay we've estimated from early testing, and we're looking forward to seeing how much you guys can get out of it. So in the gameplay, you have these different phases of the loops, and the core of the game is built around this multilinear time puzzle and moving your band of characters to the goal under a series of resource constraints. After you've cleared a level, there's some playback that creates kind of like a simple music video showing you highlights of what you did to get to the goal, and also the music that's built in all of the playback levels is made entirely from the choices that you have. You unlock some new abilities and counters. There's some customizations and vanity items for the music that come in later, but you're going to move forward in a basic campaign style story progression where there's 20 main levels in the campaign, and then there's a number, about 20 remix levels as well, that are kind of like side missions and side stories. We'll talk about that later. So when we started with the game, the first thing that we said was, what do we want this game to look like and what should it feel like? We thought about, okay, this is the 90s, there's no digital life, no internet, so cell phones. There's just the beginnings of using your computer to talk to people in other places. So it's getting a paper flyer to some kind of live music event that's going to take place this weekend and holding that in your hand, and what does that feel like, and what's the print quality like of this mass-produced thing, maybe by some indie band for a club in your hometown. The graphics are low poly, so they're built in that kind of PS1 / game video arcade style from the 1990s. You think about like Tekken and Soul Edge and things like that. So it's a low poly game, but we wanted to incorporate some spin on that, give it some high resolution textures now, use some cell shading, and we're working into this kind of aesthetic that we think the 90s feels like. So we're not trying to go with like a parody of the 90s. It's more like a homage to the 90s in terms of really replicating the simple kind of muted pastels and earth tones and things like that that were prevalent in both the architectural and commercial design of the era. So we start out with the location and where does this take place. Backbeat is a game that takes place in suburban Washington, D.C. In 1995. So they have lots of single-family homes. You have shopping malls, chain restaurants and chain video stores, the arcade at the mall with coin-op operated games, and these kind of things that you would visit. So we looked back to what does America's suburbia look like in 1995 and took a lot of inspiration from these kind of model houses. And here you can see you've got the beiges and the light muted greens and the browns and things like that. And also with the commercial sense, you have these very iconic kind of like colors like, okay, Blockbuster Video is blue and yellow, and everything in the arcade is neon and things like that. So we took these kind of feelings of what was in existing in suburban Washington, D.C. in 1995 and started working it into our own world, the town of Hornsburg. Here you can see some concept art that we did of Danny's Diner, which is a place that lots of people get their breakfast. It's open 24 hours a day, and it's also a popular place to kind of hang out. You maybe run into someone there. It's on one of those large strips between two highways, and that evolved into this place that's a center point in the story where the band, led by the protagonist Watts, she needs to recruit a saxophonist to help her build out her funk band. So they go to this Danny's Diner because there's this famous saxophonist named Chaz there that's always busking outside trying to collect money and sell his CDs to people that are going into the restaurant. Another thing that's really important about the town of Hornsburg is the clubs. The clubs of suburban Washington, D.C., where a lot of things we've referenced, like DC9 and the 1030 Club, places like this, or excuse me, the 930 Club, places that we played when we visited and saw lots of great live music when we were growing up in that era as well. And we wanted to create this feeling of it's not super produced, but it's a great place to play live rock music and on the stage. And it's a central point for all the young people to go there and get their finger on the pulse of what's happening in the music industry. The next club, DC10, is one of the places that we call it. You can see some concept here for the Hollywood movies, the pawn shop that we visit in the store, and the local dive bar that happens to have an open mic night, which is one of the key points in the story in the first act where the protagonist Watts and her band play this open mic night. Is the first time playing for somebody else outside of their house. In terms of characters, we're looking again at things from the 1990s. There's a lot of films from the 1990s and that kind of visual style that was really important to us growing up, and we wanted to put that into Backbeat. There's a couple 2 panels here, very early mood boards for 2 of the characters that for a long time we referred to them only by their instrument names, because each of the main characters in Backbeat is all based around a certain musical instrument. And these characters have the personality of how you would imagine that instrument would be set in a band and what the role is. Is it kind of loud and obnoxious, like a wind instrument, like a saxophone, or is it more supporting and stable, like a set of drums? So here you can see that the saxophone character, which ended up becoming Chaz, was actually originally designed as a woman. And there were some visual styles here, but ultimately we ended up going for something that kind of felt like a combination of John Cusack plus some of these other like pretty boy characters that were support characters in movies from the 80s and 90s. The character that became Toshi, who is the keyboardist of Backbeat, he's the typical kind of like gearhead. He's like a synth nerd. He builds his own musical instruments. He's very strong in technical sense and knows how music works from the way that it's built in theory, but in terms of practicing and performing live, maybe he's not that great. So here we have this kind of person here referencing different characters, both real and imaginary from the 80s and 90s, and that developed into his character. So, like I said, each of the characters in Backbeat goes back to one of what's their role in the band, and how does that character fulfill that role, and how does that feed into their personality in a little bit of a stereotypical type way. So here you can see the first kind of like lineup outline sketches of the 4 characters. Originally, guitar was considered for a while as one of the characters. We ended up merging some of the personality attributes of the guitarist here with what became Toshi, who was the keyboardist, and the saxophonist Chaz came on later. But here you can see how they vary in size and the ways that they come together and the kind of character style. On the far right, you have the first version of Watts when she was drawn and the way that her face was and the kind of visual language we wanted to use with the characters when they were drawn in the portraiture. Where we ended up was something very close to this, which is probably 3/4 the way through pre-production, where we have the 4 characters of Powerslyde now. You can see that we have Chaz, Toshi, Watts, and Josh, and they all have their distinct colors, which is great because it makes them easy to stand out on the game board. It's very easy to tell which one is which, both in the silhouette of the character. They have different body shapes that are based on geometric primitives. For example, like Chaz is an inverted triangle, so he's very aggressive and confrontational and narrow at the bottom. And you have Josh, who's well-rounded, but he's the kind of anchor for helping people, and he's the one that steps up to protect people if they're going to get start to be accosted or insulted by someone else. And you have Watts, who's balanced between all of them and things like that. So here you can see some of the style of the 90s that we worked in here, and we really feel like this is coming closer to what the kind of visual style that we had. We wanted something physical, so you can see all the characters have kind of like a paintbrush pattern through them. So on top of being drawn, all things in our game that are organic have this kind of like paintbrush overlay on top of them. So when you go into the actual 3D game as well, you can see that all of the trees and the plants and the grass and the characters, anything that's natural, has this paintbrush kind of aesthetic to it, which is contrasted with some of the man-made things where we're using halftone patterns and fabricated things and stuff like that. This is La Tormenta. La Tormenta are the rivals of Powerslyde, so they're kind of the antagonists of Backbeat, where Powerslyde is a funk band, and they're amateur and they're just getting started and put the crew together, and they're aiming to try to go after that battle of the bands and win that record contract. La Tormenta, on the other hand, is well established in the town of Hornsburg. They have a following, they've got rabid, nerdy hipster fans, and they perform with a lot of aplomb and stage presence. You can tell they've been doing this for a while. They're all from, they met each other through one of the local art schools, and you can see here that they have a strong sense of confidence and personality about them. You have Jack on the left, who is the leader of La Tormenta, Cindy, who's the trumpet player and kind of the jokester, Diane, who is the bassist of La Tormenta and very, very serious and obsessed with success. And then finally Ymir, who's the percussionist that brings in some of the Latin flair to their band. You can see the same kind of visual language is used in these characters, where they also have colors which are not quite as extreme as Powerslyde, but they also have a body shape and a set of colors, so they're very easy to tell each other apart when you're looking at them in the game board. So the characters are a big part of Backbeat. Like I said before with Hexagroove, we didn't get to have a story, though we really wanted to build one, and this time we get to bring that to fruition, and I'm very excited about this. So Backbeat is a story-heavy game, and there's a lot of dialogue panels where you're talking and learning about why are we on this level, what's the challenge here, and what kind of things are in blocking us from achieving the goal. Why are we happy now? How did the characters bond together? So we wanted to give them a sense of a lot of expressions, both in the 3D characters as well as the 2D. So we started working with different kinds of expressions that we could use in the dialogue panels that are mapped to different kinds of storylines. You can see here is the final expressions that ended up being used for Watts, the lead character of the game. And she has 8 different expressions that range from happy to sad to surprised and angry and things like that. And these are used both in the dialogue treatment, but also in the UI at certain times when she's interacting and kind of breaking the fourth wall and talking to the player. There are in total, I think, about 80 different character panels, or it's more than 80, like between 80 and 100 character expressions for all of the characters and supporting characters that we have in the game. This is a small screenshot showing, I think, almost all of them. And these are all drawn by hand and then given that same kind of paint brush watercolor treatment, and then the dialogue expressions are then fit into 3 different dialogue panel styles which we have in the game. So you can also customize whether you want to have comic book style type dialogue panel or what we call the note paper one that looks like it's written on top of a rolled 3-roll binder type setup. Now we're going to look at a couple key art pieces here. This is the first piece of key art that we had in Backbeat, and it kind of shows the feeling, the vibe of the game. We wanted to build something that feels like illustrating how the characters all work together and different kind of predicaments they can get into, and also showing off their personality a little bit. You see Toshi is running away from a guard dog here who's being chased by security, while Watts is trying to distract a security guard at this shopping mall, while Josh is holding open a door for a short period of time so that Chaz can sneak in and get this magical sax. It's not exactly what happens in the game, but this is the kind of thing that embodies some of the objectives and the characters that we ended up having in the title. So this kind of fills that kind of side of arcade cabinet, showing how all the characters would be together in one panel. At the end, we went all the way here. You can see how the character design has evolved a little bit now and much closer to what ended up being used in the title. This is the final key art that we made, and it throws in a lot of the things that are built into the game from a programmatic standpoint, like the visual effects, the rewinding of time. You can see how Josh is several frames where he's being rewound back into the past. Toshi is sliding forward using one of his super moves, which is the Powerslyde, and you've got all these speed lines coming off of him. Chaz is doing one of his solos where he's interacting with the environment, and it's got some of the particles that we use inside of the title. The 90s to us are about geometric patterns too, from the visual design. So we have lots of triangles, circles, and squiggles and things like that. You'll find them scattered around the environment and also used in particles. And these kind of sharp comic book style lines have energy radiating off of things like musical instruments. On the other end of the picture, you have La Tormenta standing there at the gateway at the Battle of the Bands, because that's where the game will reach its apex, and we'll see how things turn out. So talking about the story a little bit again, the Backbeat is a game where we're starting with this town of Hornsburg in the 1990s, and based on that time period, we're also thinking about films of the 1990s that we wanted to pay homage to and drew inspiration from. So when you have the movies that are built on bands and music and working together, you have these kind of themes where music conquers all, and if we collaborate, we can overcome things. And there's also a lot of internal strife. There's always a point where the band members are going to get into a fight, and there's going to be some creative differences. Things don't go out as well. You have this spectrum of films from the era, from the fantastic to the realistic, in terms of what is possible in real life and how true is it. The Commitments is a film that's we really took a lot of inspiration from, and we were really, really happy with. We think that showed a really raw, kind of honest way of what it's like to be in a band. And that's kind of some of the messages we wanted to feed in. And on the other hand, of course, we have small things where we kind of distort reality for the purposes of gameplay. So the rewinding of time and the power moves and being able to like warp through enemies and push them out of your way. Some of the things that are a bit more like Pick of Destiny or Scott Pilgrim and things like that are also included. So we're drawing from across the spectrum. In terms of the story, it's more on the realistic end, something more like Airheads or the Commitments. But in terms of the things that you can do in the game to build up that kind of fantasy, in terms of how the puzzles are unset, it's a bit more on the fantastic side. So it's a very interesting kind of spectrum that we're working on to pull us in those two different directions. For music, like I said, the game is based around funk, so we started looking a lot at funk artists, funk which reached its heyday maybe in the 1970s, and that kind of visual style filters a little bit into some of the characters. There's homages and head nods to some of the seminal artists and the kind of style of what funk was like back in the 70s, but it also carries over into the modern day the 1990s, where we were looking at album covers and promotional flyers. And of course, it's a very different kind of set of color palette and aesthetic from Hexagroove. Hexagroove is very much about like 2000s and club and electronic and dark and neon and those kind of things. But Backbeat is about orange and black, which we kind of felt were like the anthem colors of funk, and looking at all of the promotional materials and albums and things like that. And we wanted to grab that kind of vibe of what does a flyer look like in 1995. And when you're getting invited to music, they call it like the 3 reads about this information: the artist name, what's happening, where is it taking place, when is it going to be. And that kind of mass-produced flyer that's run off like a Ditto machine or a copy, so everything is like black on a piece of colored paper. And that also ties into the kind of materials that we wanted to use inside of the game. So Backbeat is built around this basic principle of change and time, and you're going along with the journey of Watts and Powerslyde as they grow from being a collection of individual people with dreams to a collective unit, which is taking on a great challenge to try to win success and notoriety in the band. The main story has about 20 levels in the game, and there's also 20 remix levels. The main story levels are a bit more serious, and there's the levels where we're seeing growth of the characters and how their relationships work out. What is it that's driving each of these people in the band, and what is driving each one of the rival characters in La Tormenta that they're butting heads against, and the supporting characters. The remix levels are a bit more lighthearted, and they usually have some kind of gag worked in, like, oh, let's let the air out of the tires of the other team's car so that they can't cut us off from getting to a show on time or something like that. So those are the kind of fun side stories that are built outside of the world of the main part of Backbeat. So you can see here is a screenshot from a very recent version of the game. We're about at a beta point right now, and you can see most of the elements I've been talking about kind of captured in this one screenshot. You have the dialogue panels. At this point, two members of La Tormenta are cracking a joke, trying to do a put down on Powerslyde when they meet them at the mall, which is that location. You can see the pastels and the earth tones in the decoration of the mall. You got to have the giant palm tree and plants like that. And in this area on the left-hand side, you can see what we call the void, which is like this space, this fog around the actual level that you play in. And inside of the void, we have this gradient between colors in the palette and some of these geometric shapes to kind of break it up. So you're kind of working on this floating island in geometric space of 1995. So that's a bit about the story and about the art. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to jump over to the game for a few minutes and check out how some of these concepts play out for real. So just one sec and I'll swap things over. Great. So here we are looking at the main menu of Backbeat, and you can see instantly some of these visual elements that I was talking about. The main menu itself is like a flyer inviting you to a musical party, and it's got the three reads. We've got the header at the top telling you about the band, and the title is the point where you can cycle through these options with kind of like this grainy halftone dotted picture photograph underneath. On the right hand side you have the characters in the main band, Powerslyde, and you can see how each of them works together and some of their kind of nuances built into the different poses that we have. So we're going to go first over into the level select screen, which is not complete yet, but it kind of has the same feeling coming in here right now. You've got a list of the different levels in the game built up on this paper with a crinkled kind of texture on top of it, and these Polaroids of the different locations that you're going to visit in each one of the levels. We're going to hop into the My Backbeat menu real quick. And here you can see what we're working on, which is the place inside of the game where you get to customize the characters in terms of the visuals, in terms of the sound, in terms of the music they create, and also check your stats and achievements and what badges you've unlocked and things like that. So again, we have like this kind of paper flyer here, and you can change between the characters and toggle between different audio settings to customize the music. You see the band kind of playing to the right. And this is also supposed to feel like the garage where they practice inside of the game. So give it that Hulksy kind of feeling where you're sitting there with them and setting things up before you go onto the journey. So looking now at the level, we'll visit just a couple of the locations. If you want to see more of the game, you can visit one of our other streams where we take you deeper into the title, or you can try out the free demo, which we have right now, which includes, I think, about 4 or 5 of the 11 locations in the game. And you can see how those work together. So if we go into this one, let's go into the boiling point. So this is the first full level of the game. It's where we start learning about the different characters and why is Watts here and what's going on with her life. Here we can see that there instantly is a lot of those things we were talking about. There's a halftone pattern on the left-hand wall of the club. We have the dialogue panel up on top with the paintbrush styled characters written over top of the note paper. And the low poly style is instant here. You can see the different chairs and the characters. There's even kind of an idle animation going on Watts right now that feels a lot like one of those 32-bit era games that were story-driven. Let's just skip through this for a second. And now we can look around a bit here inside of the level. We see that Cliff, who is the mentor to Watts and ends up being kind of like the sensei of the game, teaching her about funk, is up on stage. She's going to go talk to him here in a second. And here we have that void around the outside of the level with the circles and triangles. The isometric view in 3D space looks nice, and the tiles are staggered in a way that kind of makes it a bit extra easy with contrast to see which ones you can step on. So when I move a certain direction, I can see which tile I'm going to end up on and how that's going to work. So what we wanted to build here was something that really felt like one of those live house scenes. This one's a little bit nice. It's probably the nicest club in the game. And this is something that we wanted to create a cozy kind of space where you start to feel like what is the world and what is the maximum potential of the characters and their story. So now we're going to go back to the stage select for a second. And then let's pick one or two more. Yeah, we'll go into level 5. So what this is Watts' house. This is Watts is still living with her parents at the time of this story. And this is a single family home. The Watson family is a little bit affluent, very middle class. You've got like the wall-to-wall carpet and the beiges all over the place. A couple muted greens on the furniture here and there as well. Typical amount of gardening equipment and other tools and things like that scattered through the garage. Island in the middle of the kitchen, like that kind of stuff. And you can see that Watts' mother is patrolling the hallways right now, so we squeezed by her on the way to solving this puzzle. And next, let's pick maybe one that's not in the demo, so you can see something new. How about, yeah, let's go to the shopping mall. So the Hornsburg Town Mall is very important. It's a place here where the characters gather to hang out. I think story-wise they come here after they have a gig and are looking to relax, and they want to grab like a smoothie at one of the small stores that you have here. Like most shopping malls in the suburban DC area in the 90s, it's not super huge. We do have escalators going up to a second floor, but we've got a bit of a fountain. We've got drink machines, the excessive amounts of plants which were not naturally going to grow here scattered around and things like that, and people milling around in the food court area. There's the Orange Lazarus, which is the place in the mall that Powerslyde always goes to get a snack after they've had a gig. Down here we have one of the entrances to the mall. Up here there's Lancelot Music, which is a brick and mortar record store where you can buy vinyl and CDs and things like that. And at this particular point I think they have a mission to go there and talk to that guy in the orange shirt at the end. And over here we got some very period type artwork hung up on the walls in the center of the open area of the mall. All right, so that's it for us today. We've talked a bit about the art and how we're bringing in the physical materials of the 1990s and manifesting it both in the way the characters are drawn in the UI, as well as the 3D space and the way the shaders are used. I've also talked a bit about the story and the inspirations that the game has in terms of the films that we're building the feeling around, that kind of ensemble piece in the 1990s. And we've touched a little bit on how the levels are split up and the different kinds of levels are and how that affects the story in the game. So I'm really happy that we got to look at this together today, and I hope that you are excited for trying the game now. There's a demo on Steam, which you can try right away. If you wishlist the page at this moment, you can know when we're going to have more streams. There's lots that we're doing this week, and also some live bits, doing some contests on the side as well. And we'd love to hear feedback from you guys. What do you think about the visual style? And what do you think about the story? And ask us more about these characters and this world that they live in. You can follow us on social media. Please follow us on Twitter, Ichigo Inc., and on Instagram, Ichigo Games. We also have a YouTube channel, and you can learn more about the title by visiting our retro 1990s website at backbeatgame.com. So, thanks for today, and I look forward to hearing from you soon. Cheers!